I have kept the family's records for 31 years. I have cataloged birth certificates and death certificates, estate deeds and legal instruments, dinner invitations from heads of state, and handwritten notes from a boy who would one day make heads of state lower their eyes when he entered a room. I have touched every document this family ever produced or received. I have read and kept silent about things that would have ruined marriages, reversed inheritances, and ended careers. I say this so you understand. I know what it means when something is missing from an archive. And I know what it means when something has been buried there on purpose. His name is known in every city where money is held and fear is currency. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. A room changes the moment he enters it. Not because people are afraid of what he might do, but because they have never seen what he actually did. And that unknowing is its own kind of gravity. He is precise, controlled, and loyal to the family name in the way that only people who have paid dearly to keep it intact ever are. I had worked for him for 31 years before the young woman arrived. She came in November, recommended by a solicitor's firm that handled the family's legal correspondence. Her name was Miss Calloway. She was 32, perhaps 33, slight, quiet-eyed, with the particular composure of someone who has learned not to expect much from rooms before she has earned them. She dressed plainly. She took careful notes. She asked no questions about the family that were not directly relevant to the task she had been given, which was this: to reorganize the family's secondary archive. 14 boxes of unsorted correspondence from the years 1959 to 1988, which had sat in the lower archive room since the death of his father's personal secretary, a woman named Mrs. Alderton, who had retired in 2019 and died quietly 2 years later. Nobody had touched those boxes. Mrs. Alderton had been with the family for 32 years, a year longer than me. She was efficient, devoted, and entirely correct in her manner. She also, I now know, had reason to keep those 14 boxes unsorted for as long as she lived. Miss Calloway did not ask me for the history. She simply worked. She came in each morning at 8 o'clock, signed the access log, put on the white cotton gloves kept in the archive drawer, and sat down among the boxes. I watched her through the window in the archive door, not because I was suspicious, but because I had watched every person who ever touched those boxes. It is the archivist's reflex. The hands tell you everything about how a person regards what they are holding. Miss Calloway's hands were careful. On the 17th day, I know because I keep a log of all access, she did not come to my window as she usually did at noon to replace her gloves. At 12:40 she appeared in the doorway of my office instead. She was holding a letter. It was still sealed. The envelope was old War Office paper, that particular weight and cream, with the printed crest that they stopped using in 1974. It had never been opened. The name on the front was his father's, written in a civil servant's careful hand, the ink darkened to brown at the edges, the way iron gall goes when it has been sitting in a box for half a century. She placed it on my desk without a word. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked at her. It was filed in a box marked Household Expenses 1971, she said, with the gas bills. I picked it up. The postmark said the 14th of March, 1973. There are 2 more, she said. I am 63 years old. I have worked for this family since I was 32. I had never held anything in that archive that made my hands uncertain. Sit down, Miss Calloway, I said. She sat. We did not open them. They were not ours to open. But the routing number on the envelope was one I recognized from my training in government correspondence, a commendation notation from the War Office, used specifically for service citations. His father had served. I knew that much. He did not speak of it. It was the kind of service that happened before the family's name meant what it now means, when his father was 23 years old and not yet feared by anyone. I knew, sitting there, what the letters were. And I knew what it meant that they had arrived in 1973 and been filed, still sealed, with the gas bills. Miss Calloway looked at me steadily. I don't want to give them to him without knowing what they are, she said. He shouldn't be blindsided. I told her I agreed. She asked me carefully whether I would be willing to make one phone call to a colleague at the National Archive, whose name she had researched and written on a small card, which she slid across my desk, to confirm the routing notation before anything else was done. She had already done the research. She had not acted on it. She had stopped and asked. I made the call. What I was told, on background, by a very cautious civil servant who eventually agreed to speak more freely when I gave him the routing number. Was this: his father had been cited for an act of service in the winter of 1972, during a period of civil unrest that the family has never spoken of publicly. The citation had been approved. A formal letter of commendation had been sent. According to the archives record, it had been received and signed for. It had been signed for by a Mrs. E. Alderton, personal secretary, on behalf of the family. And then it had disappeared. There were 3 of them in total: the initial citation letter, a follow-up requesting acknowledgement, and a third, sent 6 months later, formally noting that since no acknowledgement had been received, the citation would remain in the office's records, but no public ceremony would be held. 50 years. Miss Calloway sat in my office while I made the calls. She did not fidget. She did not ask questions. When I had finished and set the receiver down, she asked only one thing: is there a path to have it formally presented? Posthumously, there was. It would require a formal request, documentary evidence, and a civic sponsor willing to host the presentation. It would take approximately 6 to 8 weeks to arrange. I can do that, she said, if you'll help me with the forms. I want to be precise about something. She did not ask his permission, not yet. She did not go to him with a half-formed plan and a sealed envelope and an explanation she hadn't fully prepared. She spent 3 weeks building the case, quietly on her own time, before and after her archival hours, and only when the civic office had confirmed the date and the formal certificate had been issued and the presentation was arranged did she come to me and ask whether I would accompany her to give him the news. She had done all of it. She had done it because it was right. I had watched this family for 31 years. I had watched people orbit it, use it, flatter it, and betray it. I had watched secretaries come and go. I had watched Mrs. Alderton for 32 years and never once suspected what I now know she had done, and why. I had never watched anyone do what Miss Calloway had done. Simply and without announcement. The right thing. We told him on a Thursday morning. In the study, I had seen him receive difficult news. I had seen him receive good news. I had never, in 31 years, seen him receive something for which he had no response prepared. She placed the 3 envelopes on his desk. She explained briefly what they were, where they had been found, and what she had done. She did not explain why she had done it without being asked. She did not editorialize about Mrs. Alderton. She simply presented the fact. The commendation had been suppressed. It had been restored. The ceremony was in 4 weeks. He did not speak for a long time. He picked up the first envelope, the original citation, still sealed after 51 years, and held it in both hands the way a man holds something he does not want to break. His face was entirely still. Then something in it moved, just once, like a fault line, and was still again. My father never knew, he said. No, she said. I'm sorry. He set the envelope down. He looked at her, really looked at her, the way he looks at things he is trying to understand, and said nothing for another long moment. How long did this take you? 3 weeks, she said, of evenings. He said nothing. She stood and collected her notepad from the edge of his desk and said that she would leave him to read them in private, and that all the paperwork was in the folder on the right, and that she was sorry again for the reason it had been necessary. She was almost to the door when he said her name, her surname, which he had not, until that moment, ever used. She turned. Thank you, he said. Miss Calloway. She nodded once and left. I stayed. I am the archivist. It is sometimes my job to stay. He sat for a long time with the envelopes. When he finally opened the first one, I heard the paper. 51 years old, dry and precise, pull away from the flap with a sound like a question finally answered. He read it without moving. He read all 3. Then he placed them carefully on the desk and looked at the middle distance for a long moment, and I understood that whatever he was thinking was not for me to witness, and I excused myself and left him to it. The ceremony was held on the 14th of December in the old Civic Hall. It was a formal affair, perhaps 40 people, by invitation, which was how the civic office preferred to handle posthumous honors of this kind. He came in a dark suit as he always does, and the room arranged itself around him, as it always does. And several people who had never met his father said careful, respectful things about the service record that Miss Calloway's documentation had restored to the official file. She sat in the second row. She had come as a staff member, at his request. She wore a gray dress, her hair pinned back. She did not look at him during the speeches. When the formal certificate was presented, a mounted document framed, with the original citation reproduced on archival paper he received it from the presenter's hands and stood for a moment holding it in the same way he had held the envelope, as if it were something irreplaceable. Which it was. Then he turned. He did not face the room. He did not face the presenter. He walked to the second row and stood in front of Miss Calloway, who looked up at him with the particular expression of someone who is doing their best to be invisible inside a moment that has found them anyway. "Stand up, please," he said, quietly, the way he says everything. She stood. He held the framed certificate out to her. "You did this," he said. "Not me. You found it. You restored it. You gave him back what he was owed." He paused. "My father would have wanted you to hold this first." She took it. Her hands, I noticed, were careful, just as they had been in the archive. She held it the way she had held those gas-filed envelopes on the 17th day, as if the thing inside mattered. The room was very quiet. He spoke, not loudly but precisely, so that the 40 people present could hear, and said that the woman standing beside him had come to his family service 3 months ago as a secretary, and that she had done, without being asked, the finest thing anyone in his employ had ever done for his family, and that he intended to amend that description immediately. "She is not a secretary," he said. "She is the keeper of this family's records and its name. If she will have it." Miss Calloway looked at him for a moment. Then, very quietly, she said, "Yes. In 31 years, I have added 116 names to the family's formal staff roster in the archive ledger. The entry I made that evening, when I returned to my office and opened the current ledger to the correct page, was the only one I have ever made twice. Once in the running log, as procedure requires, and once again on the facing page in my own hand, the date, her name, and the 4 words he had said. Not a secretary. The keeper. I filed the 3 envelopes in the family's primary archive that night, in acid-free sleeves, in a box labeled with his father's name and the year, where they should have been for 50 years, where they will be now, for however many years come after. The archivist closes the ledger. The family is whole.